The night Nadia wrote those 3 digits on a restaurant bill, she had no idea she was about to change the course of her life forever. She'd been working the late shift at Harlow's Diner for 2 years, long enough to know every regular by face, every booth by its squeaks, and every cook by the smell of their cigarette breaks. Harlow's sat on the corner of King Street West in Hamilton, Ontario, the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu since 1987 and was proud of it. The laminated placemats still advertised the lunch special for $4.99. The coffee was bad and the pie was good, and the tips on a Friday night were just enough. Nadia needed just enough. She needed a little more than just enough, actually. Her younger brother Danny had been in a rehabilitation facility in Burlington for 6 weeks, recovering from a car accident that had left his left leg rebuilt with titanium, and his medical bills stacked like a second mortgage. Their mother, Vera, was 63 and working part-time at a fabric store in Westdale. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Nadia was 28, and she had quietly become the load-bearing wall of their small family without anyone formally deciding it should be that way. She didn't resent it. That was the thing people didn't understand about her. She wasn't walking around full of bitterness, counting the hours she wasn't sleeping. She loved Danny. She loved her mother. She just needed this shift to go smoothly, needed the kitchen not to lose Table 7's order again, needed the rain outside to not keep the dinner crowd away. The rain was keeping the dinner crowd away. By 8 o'clock on that Thursday in October, Harlow's had 4 occupied tables. A retired couple by the window who always split the meatloaf. 2 university students sharing a plate of fries and studying from the same laptop. A solo businessman in the far corner booth, tapping at his phone, tie loosened, who'd ordered black coffee and nothing else, and now the booth near the back. Nadia saw them arrive. She was refilling the meatloaf couple's water when the front door opened and the cold came in with them. 4 men. 2 went ahead and 2 hung back near the door like they weren't really there to eat. The man in front, the one who was clearly the reason the other 3 existed, was tall, well-built, somewhere in his early 40s. He wore a charcoal overcoat that cost more than Nadia's monthly rent. His dark hair was shot through with grey at the temples. He moved through the diner the way certain people move through spaces, not loudly, not with any visible effort, but in a way that made the room quietly reorganize itself around him. Nadia set down the water pitcher. Her co-worker Britt, who was 19 and mostly preoccupied with her phone between tables, leaned over the counter and whispered, "New table. You want it? Or me?" "I'll take it," Nadia said without fully knowing why. She picked up her order pad and walked over. The 2 men near the door hadn't sat down. They positioned themselves with a kind of casual deliberateness, hands loose at their sides, backs to the wall, eyes on the room. Nadia had served enough people in enough kinds of circumstances to recognize that these 2 weren't going to order anything. They were furniture, expensive, alert furniture. The man in the overcoat had taken the booth seat that faced the door. The 4th man, younger, with a sharp jaw and watchful eyes, sat across from him, though it was obvious he wasn't really sitting as a guest. He was sitting as a function. Nadia approached. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up from the menu he hadn't been reading. His eyes were grey-green, calm in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. There was a small scar along his jaw, faded to silver. He studied her for exactly 1 second, the kind of look that takes inventory without being rude, and then said, "Coffee, black." His accent was faint, continental European underneath a Canadian veneer, like someone who'd done the work of sounding like everyone else. "Of course," Nadia said. "Are you ready to order, or do you need a few minutes?" "A few minutes." She went back to the counter. Britt was watching the table with unconcealed curiosity. "You know who that is?" Britt whispered. Nadia glanced back. "No. Should I?" Britt gave her a look that combined genuine disbelief with the particular superiority of someone who follows too much local news. "That's Vincent Caruso." The name landed somewhere in Nadia's memory and found purchase. She didn't watch the news obsessively, but you didn't live in the Hamilton-Toronto corridor without picking up certain names the way you pick up weather patterns, not from any single source, but from the ambient atmosphere of the place. Vincent Caruso, construction, real estate. The kind of business interests that newspapers described in careful, legally vetted language. The kind of man whose name appeared in coverage of charitable galas and in separate articles in connection with other things that were never quite proven. "You're sure?" Nadia said. "My uncle did electrical work on one of his builds in Stony Creek," Britt said. "Said he saw him twice." "That's him." Nadia looked at the table again. Mr. Caruso was saying something low and quiet to the younger man across from him, who was listening with the focused expression of someone taking mental notes. She poured the coffee. She filled a glass of water. She carried them over on her tray and set them down without her hands doing anything unusual, because her hands didn't know yet what her mind was beginning to understand. She'd just placed the coffee cup in front of Mr. Caruso when she heard the sound. It was subtle, a shift in the ambient noise of the diner. Not loud, not obvious, but wrong. She'd worked enough late shifts in enough quiet places to know when something had changed in the texture of a room. She looked toward the front windows without turning her head fully. A dark SUV had pulled up across the street. The engine was off, but the lights were on. Just sitting there, Nadia set the water in front of the younger man. "Do you need anything else right now?" she asked. "No," said Mr. Caruso, without looking up. She walked back to the counter. Her heart was doing something inconvenient. She told it to stop. The thing was, and this was the part she would have trouble explaining later, the part that would make people look at her like she'd done something either very brave or very stupid. The thing was that she recognized the SUV. Not the vehicle itself. The make, the color, the posture of it sitting there in the rain with its lights on and its engine off. She recognized what it meant because she had seen something like it before, 8 months ago, when Danny had borrowed money from people he shouldn't have borrowed money from, before the accident, when things were very different and very bad, and Nadia had spent 3 weeks sleeping 4 hours a night with her phone on her chest. Danny had sorted it, or she'd thought he had, but she still recognized the shape of a car that wasn't parked so much as positioned. She stood at the counter for a moment and thought. This wasn't her problem. Vincent Caruso was not her responsibility. She didn't know him. She didn't owe him anything. The sensible thing, the thing any reasonable person would do, was to go refill the meatloaf couple's coffee and wait for the dinner rush that wasn't coming and stay very far away from whatever was happening outside. She thought about that. She genuinely considered it, and then she picked up her order pad and she walked back to table 4. "Ready to order?" she asked, her pen poised. "The burger," Mr. Caruso said, still not looking at the menu. "Medium, no onions, great choice." She wrote it down. Then, without pausing, without changing her tone, she kept writing. When she tore the top sheet off the pad and set it beside his coffee cup, she'd written the order in the upper portion, and in the lower right corner, small and deliberate, 911. Not as in an emergency call, as in the table number across from the window. No, she crossed that thought out in her own head. She wrote it because it was the only signal she could think of that meant something and nothing at the same time. That could be a phone number, could be a table note, could be completely meaningless to anyone but the person who needed it not to be. She set the slip on the table and walked away. She went to the kitchen. She told Ray the cook about the burger, medium, no onions. She came back out and began wiping down the counter that didn't need wiping, keeping her breathing even, her movements ordinary. 45 seconds passed. She felt rather than saw Mr. Caruso's attention shift. It was like a change in air pressure, subtle, directional. She allowed herself one glance. He was holding the order slip. His thumb was covering the lower corner. His eyes were on the front window. He set the slip down. He said something very quietly to the man across from him. The younger man nodded once, took out his phone and began typing. 2 minutes later, one of the men near the front door moved. Not dramatically, he didn't draw anything, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The second man near the door followed a moment after. The SUV across the street turned its lights off. Then it pulled away from the curb and drove east on King Street and was gone. Nadia kept wiping the counter. Her heart was doing something very loud, but no one could hear that. She focused on the sensation of the cloth in her hand, the smell of the cleaning spray, the faint sound of the university students laughing at something on their shared laptop. Mr. Caruso's burger came up 8 minutes later. She carried it over. "Anything else I can get you?" He looked at her, not the inventory look from before. Something different, slower, more direct. The kind of attention that didn't happen by accident. "Sit down," he said. It wasn't a request exactly, but it wasn't threatening either. It was the way someone speaks when they're accustomed to being understood without having to explain the full sentence. Nadia looked around the diner. Britt had disappeared into the back. The meatloaf couple was paying their bill. The businessman in the far corner was pulling on his coat. She sat, not across from him. There was already someone sitting across from him, but in the edge of the booth beside the younger man, who shifted over without being asked. "You wrote that yourself," Mr. Caruso said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what you mean," Nadia said, which was technically true because she wasn't certain what number she'd actually written, just that she'd written something that she hoped communicated something she couldn't say out loud. He almost smiled. It was a very small thing, barely a movement. "You do know what you mean," he said. "The question is how." Nadia considered this. A car parked like that, lights on, engine off on a wet night, not a lot of reasons for that. Most people wouldn't notice. Most people aren't paying attention, she said. He looked at her for a moment. "What's your name?" Nadia. He said it once, like he was placing it somewhere. Why did you do that? This was the question she hadn't prepared an answer to, because she hadn't prepared anything. She'd just acted the way you act when something in your body decides before your brain catches up. She thought about Danny. She thought about 3 weeks of sleeping with her phone on her chest. She thought about what it felt like to know that something bad was arranged just out of your sight, and you were the only person who'd noticed the shape of it. I don't know, she said honestly. I just thought someone should. Mr. Caruso was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee. You've seen something like that before, he said. It wasn't a question either. Yes. He didn't ask what or when or whose problem it was. He just nodded once, the way you nod when a fact is simply a fact. The burger's getting cold, Nadia said. This time he did smile. Small, still, but real. She excused herself and went back to the counter and stood there for a moment with her hands flat on the laminate surface, feeling the solidity of it. Her breathing was coming back to something normal. The meatloaf couple left a $7 tip. The university students asked for the bill. She thought, that's it then. It's done. He knows she'd done the thing. And now the world was going to keep turning and she was going to cash out her float at 11 and drive home in the rain and check on Danny's medication schedule and sleep for 5 hours before her opening shift on Friday. That was what she thought. She was wrong. Mr. Caruso ate his burger. He left a tip that was by any reasonable measure insane, not ostentatious, folded neatly under the saucer found only when Nadia cleared the table after he'd gone, but large enough that she stood there for a moment in the empty diner, holding the bills and doing the math twice. He didn't leave a number, he didn't leave a note, he just left. 2 days later, Nadia was getting off her morning shift. It was Saturday, just past 3 in the afternoon, the kind of October day that can't decide whether it wants to rain or just threaten to, when she found a woman waiting for her outside the staff entrance. Well-dressed, somewhere in her 50s, with the kind of posture that suggested a background in either dance or discipline. Nadia? The woman said. Yes, my name is Catherine Moreau. I work for Mr. Caruso. She said it plainly, without the particular quality of someone delivering a threat. He'd like to know if you'd be willing to have a conversation. Somewhere neutral, your choice of location. No obligation to continue after the first meeting. Nadia stood there on the wet pavement outside the staff entrance with her jacket half-zipped and her bag over her shoulder and thought, here it is then, the part where the story becomes something else. What kind of conversation? She asked. He has a position, Catherine Moreau said. One that requires a specific kind of judgment. He's been looking to fill it for some time. After Thursday evening, he believes you may have it. Nadia almost laughed. I'm a waitress. You were a waitress on Thursday, Catherine said, with the mild tone of someone making a distinction. What you did on Thursday was something else. There was a coffee shop on James Street North that Nadia had always liked. Good light, noisy enough for privacy, the kind of place where a meeting could look like nothing in particular. She said she'd be there Monday at noon if Mr. Caruso wanted to have a conversation. He was there at 5 to 12, alone, or as alone as he ever was. She could see the younger man with the watchful eyes at a table near the door, nursing an Americano and reading a newspaper he clearly wasn't reading. Mr. Caruso stood when she came in. He waited for her to sit. He asked what she was drinking, and when she said flat white, he went to the counter himself to order it, which she found unexpectedly odd. When he came back and they were both sitting with their cups, he said, I should be direct with you. I'd prefer that, Nadia said. What you did Thursday, I've had people working in proximity to me for 15 years who wouldn't have made that call. Some because they were afraid. Some because it wasn't their problem. Some because they simply didn't see it. He paused. You saw it. You weren't afraid, or you were afraid and you did it anyway, which is the same result. And it wasn't your problem, but you made it yours. Nadia wrapped both hands around her cup. What happened out there? She asked. After. He looked at her for a moment like he was deciding something. The car was connected to a business dispute, he said. The kind that doesn't get resolved in boardrooms. My people became aware of it. And it was handled. Was anyone hurt? No. She believed him. She wasn't entirely certain why, but she did. The position Catherine mentioned, she said. What is it exactly, Lazen? He said. Between my office and certain community relationships I maintain. Housing, employment, legal referral. I have obligations to people in a number of neighborhoods, and the person who manages those relationships needs to be someone those people trust, someone who looks at a room and understands what's happening in it. He paused. Someone with judgment. Nadia thought about this carefully. Why would people in those communities trust someone who works for you? It was a direct question. She saw something in his expression that might have been respect. Because I give them reason to, he said. I'm not asking you to trust me on faith. I'm asking you to consider a 6-month arrangement. At the end of 6 months, you can leave with no complication and no obligation. The salary is, he named a figure. Nadia set her cup down. The figure was more than she made in a year at Harlow's. She looked at the table for a moment. She thought about Danny's physio appointments, which were twice a week and not covered. She thought about her mother working Tuesdays and Thursdays at the fabric store, because the alternative was falling behind on the hydro bill. She thought about the particular quality of exhaustion that had lived in her chest for the better part of a year. Not the dramatic kind, just the slow, grinding fatigue of being the person who figures it out. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," said Mr. Caruso. She looked up. "And I need to understand what I would and wouldn't be asked to do. Clearly. Before I agree to anything, I'll have Catherine prepare documentation," he said. "Every responsibility outlined, every boundary, including what happens if those boundaries conflict." He held her gaze, including that. She went home. She did not tell her mother what the meeting had been about. Not yet. Not until she was sure. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea going cold and thought about what judgment actually meant. It wasn't a gift you were born with. It was built from experience, from paying attention, from every moment you'd been in a difficult situation and had to figure out what mattered and what didn't. She thought about Thursday night. The rain. The SUV across the street. The order pad in her hand. She hadn't thought about it, really. She'd just known. She called Catherine Moreau the next morning. The documentation arrived by courier that afternoon. Printed, thorough, organized with a precision that told her something about the operation she was considering attaching herself to. She read it twice. She called a lawyer she knew from a community legal clinic in Dundas, where she'd once volunteered, someone she trusted, and asked her to look it over. The lawyer called back in the evening with a raised eyebrow but no serious concerns. On Wednesday, Nadia called Catherine and said yes. She worked her last shift at Harlow's on Friday. She told Kevin, the owner, that she'd found something else, and he was disappointed but not surprised. People didn't usually leave Harlow's with a plan. They just left, and she seemed like someone who'd had one for a while. He wished her luck. Ray the cook made her a piece of pie on the house. Britt hugged her and then went back to her phone. She walked out of the diner on King Street West at 11:15 on a Friday night, and the air smelled like rain coming and someone's wood smoke from somewhere nearby, and she stood on the pavement for a moment, thinking about how certain moments feel like a door you're walking through, even when you're not entirely sure what's on the other side. She walked to her car. She drove home in the rain. Danny called from Burlington while she was driving, because he'd been doing physio and wanted to tell her it had gone well. That the physiotherapist said his range of motion had improved 11% over the last month, that she shouldn't worry so much. She told him she wasn't worried. She told him that was good news. She told him she'd come see him on Sunday. When she hung up, she sat in the parked car outside her building and let herself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the full weight of what the last 2 years had been. The shifts, the bills, the sleeping with the phone on her chest, the calculating and recalculating and holding things together with the particular grim competence of someone who doesn't have the option to drop anything. She let herself feel it. Then she got out of the car. The following weeks were not what she'd expected, which was a theme she was beginning to understand about her new life. The work was real. Not decorative, not a sinecure dressed up to look like something else. It was actual work. She spent her first 3 weeks shadowing Catherine, learning the landscape of relationships that Mr. Caruso maintained across the lower city. Community organizations in the East End, a housing referral network in the North, a group of small business owners in the Italian-Canadian neighborhoods of the West who had been coming to him for generations, for reasons that mixed legitimate concern with cultural loyalty in ways that couldn't be neatly separated. She met people. She listened more than she talked. She took notes in her own shorthand and organized them in ways that she suspected Catherine hadn't seen before, because Catherine said so. She saw Mr. Caruso twice in those first 3 weeks. Brief, professional, nothing to read into. He asked clear questions and listened to the answers without performing the act of listening. That was more unusual than it sounded. In the 4th week, she had her first real test. A woman named Gloria Tesfaye came to the office, not to see Mr. Caruso, but to see Nadia, because someone from the East End community group had told her Nadia might be able to help. Gloria was 51, a tenant in a building on Barton Street, owned by a company 344 corporate removes away from anyone you could actually talk to, and her heat had been out for 11 days. It was November. She had 2 grandchildren living with her. Nadia knew the mechanism. She knew which city department handled rental standards complaints. She knew how long the process took through normal channels. She also knew from her 3 weeks of listening that the property management company had a relationship with a municipal councillor, whose campaign had received support from entities that connected, in the way things sometimes connected, back to Mr. Caruso's sphere. She thought about it for a while. Then she knocked on Catherine's office door and asked if she could make a call. The heat in Gloria Tesfaye's apartment was restored in 48 hours. Nadia didn't celebrate this. It was one thing in one apartment, and the larger systems that created it were entirely unchanged. But she sat with the knowledge that she'd done something real and specific for a real and specific person, and that felt different from any job she'd had before. She told Mr. Caruso about it the next time she saw him, not because she needed his approval, but because it seemed like the kind of information that was relevant to share. He listened. He said, "Good 2 words." But from a man of few words, it was something. 6 months passed. He asked her to stay. She asked for 2 days to think about it, not because she needed them, but because she'd learned that the way you negotiated the terms of your continued presence in someone's orbit mattered. That giving an immediate yes was a form of cheapening the thing you were being asked to give. On the 2nd day, she called Catherine and said she'd stay for another year under revised terms that she'd outlined in an email. The revised terms were accepted without negotiation. She told her mother that evening, over dinner at the kitchen table with the radio on low and the autumn dark outside the window, that she'd changed jobs and that things were going to be more stable for a while, that she was making enough that Danny's physiotherapy was covered and the hydro bill was not something to worry about. Her mother looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of a woman who had spent decades watching her daughter carry things without complaining. "Are you okay?" Vera asked. "Yes," Nadia said, and then, because her mother deserved more than the efficient answer, "I think I'm doing something that makes sense. I think I found a place where what I'm good at is actually useful." Vera reached across the table and put her hand over Nadia's. "You've always been useful," she said. "I just wanted you to feel it." Nadia didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the November rain had started again. The same kind of rain that had been falling on King Street West on the night she'd picked up her order pad and written 3 digits in the corner of a restaurant bill and changed the course of everything. She thought about that night sometimes. Not obsessively, not with any particular drama, just the way you return to certain moments that turn out to have been hinges. The order pad in her hand, the laminate of the counter, the SUV sitting across the wet street with its lights on and its engine off, the decision that wasn't really a decision, just something her body understood before she could articulate it. Someone should. That was all it had been. The simplest possible reason. Not heroism, not calculation. Just the quiet conviction that when you see something and you have the means to do something, and it costs you nothing but nerve, then the only question is whether you're willing to spend it. She was, apparently. She was still willing.